Discover the potential of decentralized technology and Web3 for businesses on our podcast. As a professional, if you want to finally understand tokenization, Metaverse, cryptocurrency, blockchain, and Web3, this is the content for you. My name is Łukasz Szymański from Tokenomia Pro, where we help businesses transition to the Web3 world. Joining us today is Aleksandar Damjanovic, a token engineer at MVP Workshop with experience in Web3 research and background in quantitative finance. Passionate about finance, economics, and Web3 economy design. Alex, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Łukasz. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure for me too. Alex is also a host of the Token Engineering Study Group under the Token Engineering Academy, and like me, he shares a passion for the field of token engineering and the possibilities it holds for the future. Alex, can you tell me what's your study group about and how was it so far? What do you think about Token Engineering Academy as a host? And what are your thoughts on the Academy after the first season of study groups?
So basically, last summer, me and my two buddies, Tiago and Pablo, we started a study group internally where it was just us three. But later, like a couple of months later, the TE Academy came up with the idea of study groups and actually like having study groups a bit more structured. So we decided to create a study group called Agora, which is basically curated and created for international students. We tried to formulate our content in a way that, like in a college, we basically separated the course contents from the TE Academy or TE Fundamentals. We separated it in a way that's like more a college-based course. So we tried to separate all the content in like weekly basis, and we actually tried to split the whole content in a length of one semester. So we tried to take it slow, and we actually got quite a lot of like actual members joining in the discussions. So I was pretty happy with all the community that we actually managed to get. Also, like the TE Fundamentals and the TE Academy guys provided us with some great free content that we can cover, and some questions and quizzes that we can go around and actually have some healthy discussions and to learn more about the space. I must say Agora was pretty successful. We had a bunch of people in the start. Later we get a little bit of less people. But it was all in all, it was a great opportunity to meet people in the space and to actually ask some important questions and get some important answers. I was pretty happy with the content and with the study group.
And what are your observations in terms of audience of your study group?
Initially, when we first started, we thought about it that it would be mostly like curated for the students. But when we created the first call of Agora sessions, Agora Scholar sessions, we actually got a bunch of Web3 OGs and the people that are pretty long in the space. And it was not students only. Maybe like at the end of the course and the end of it was like 10% students and 90% of OGs, like engineers, developers, and stuff like that. We didn't have any lawyers, but we had a bunch of people that work in finance, that work in like cybersecurity and stuff like that. So it got quite a like diversified audience, quite diversified students.
For me, what is always important is that we are able to involve also non-technical people, and we have that as well. However, the main challenge, I think, is how to make sure that non-technical people will be also able to found themselves somehow in this whole content and approach, because at some point, especially like I think module 3 or 4, it's highly technical, so then people without the technical background can be a little bit lost. And I think that with upcoming study groups, maybe we'll be able to address it a little better. But on the other side, at the end of the day, it's token engineering. So the name also suggests something that it's still field of engineering, so technical approach, it's also needed. So it brings me to my second question. In your words, if you would like to explain to somebody what is this token engineering all about and how it differs from like kind of standard traditional approach to token economy and design of the token economy.
So when we talk about like the classical token design, I try to separate it in a way that's like token design can be used in designing systems that can be completely centralized and stuff like that. While the token engineering, the bigger focus is in actually creating a decentralized, fully transparent systems that can be governed by using governance tokens that we design, and we design the incentives. My main separation between token design and token engineering, I would say that token engineering goes more into designing more decentralized systems, while token design is more based around designing like the token economics and things around that, while token engineering is more around actual mathematics, actual incentive design, game theory, and all the things that come with that. So I would separate it in a kind of, maybe you do not agree with me, but I would separate token design and token engineering in terms of decentralization. Like, the much bigger focus is on decentralization in the token engineering process, which is not a necessity. Of course, like token engineering principles can be used in token design, and we use it all the time, but I think that's like the main idea around it. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is like my perception. That's how I approach it. Maybe you have a different view on it. I would be interested in hearing your opinions.
Yeah, I don't think you are wrong. It's one of the probably many points of view, especially in the field that is still defining itself. For me, token engineering, it's the approach, meaning that for me, it describes the specific process that it's recommended to follow in order to design the system, the crypto economic system, decentralized system, as you mentioned, to make sure that it just works and it's sustainable. And I think that even the person who coined this term even is using such words like in his articles, that it's just all about to make sure it just works in simple terms. So for me, the token engineering, it's for sure a lot about the process, how we approach designing the whole system. So not only the token economy. For me, token economy, it's more like monetary system of the whole crypto economic system. So that's why when I'm referring to token engineering, I'm referring to the process that we are using to model whole system, not only the economy of the token itself. And when I'm trying to explain to somebody out of our industry, what are we doing, like what we are working on, I like to start with trying to explain what the economy is. And I found some time ago in some book a really simple description of the economy, which says that the economy, it's just incentives and disincentives and policies, meaning that you are making sure that agents in the economy are doing what you want them to do. They are not doing what you don't want them to do. And you are putting some policies and that acts either as an incentive or penalty in order to make sure that the system works as intended. So with this in mind, putting it into token engineering process, it's something that also you referred to, which is how to properly design incentive system that will make sure for us that the system will be sustainable, especially that it's decentralized, that it's connected to finances, that it's connected to the governance, that it's transparent, permissionless. So you have so many variables and so many factors that token engineering process helps you handle it somehow. That's how I see token engineering as a process that helps to model the whole system. I do agree that it's more about mathematics, and how I like to call it, it's more about academic approach. We had this chat before about the different approaches, so maybe we will jump into it through the discussion today. Or maybe let's try to talk about it right now because I like it. So for the listeners, before with Alex, before we had this discussion of how I'm calling it academic approach versus business approach. And the difference for me is, and please forgive me, all of the people from academic field, because I'm not really from this background. I'm giving lectures on the universities, right? But I'm not like from academic background itself. But for me, as the people looking at the space, academic approach is more around doing a lot of research that takes a lot of time, that tries to find and address all of the possible cases, approaches, whatever you may think of. So at the end of the day, we can be sure that we take as most as possible into the account, and we are as objective as possible. While where I see the challenge, as much as I love the approach, the challenge that I see, is it a fit for the market right now? And is it something that businesses interested in the field, projects, protocols, is it something that they, first of all, are aware of that it's needed? And is it something that they want to invest their budget in? And I do think that still there is some gap here. And that's why, at least from my experience running a company that is offering such services, personally, I am proud of myself that I am able to convince clients and bring awareness around necessity of doing simulations, which are only the part of the whole academic approach of the protocol design, etc. Alex, what's your take on that? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I somewhat agree with you. I think the main problem is actually how marketable is the actual approach itself. I think like the actual academic approach is more rigorous, more thorough. Severely, it can increase the robustness of the system. But main pain point of this approach is, do the actual investors, do the actual client actually want this kind of approach, or do they even have the time or the resources for this approach? The main problem is the timing, like the actual time of the project and the time that the project needs to be delivered and put on the market, and convincing the clients that, okay, the mathematic, the academic approach, the thorough approach is the best one. At the end of the day, we are dealing with tokens, with cryptocurrencies. At the end of the day, also like the other people's money in some way. So I think we need to be super careful, but it all depends on the client's needs and the timing and stuff like that. So that's my actual comment on that. The main problem is marketing. Is it marketable, and actually communicating the benefits that this approach brings?
We will talk about the benefits that it brings to businesses. That will be my next question. The last comment and question to you in this topic is, from what I see on the market, I think the awareness is far much bigger when we talk about the projects more on the protocol level. So the projects that are trying to bring building blocks and infrastructure to the Web3. But then in terms of the application layer, so businesses that just want to build on top of some existing infrastructure, then it's, in terms of awareness, it's totally different case. What's your experience here?
Yeah, it depends on the projects themselves. If the project is somewhat simple, I think like the whole academic approach can be an overkill, if I can say it in that way. But I think it, like the whole token engineering process, can benefit all the projects from the protocol level to the application level. Because where you're building, if you're doing those kind of research efforts, I think that can be only beneficial and not a waste of time and resources. So that's my comment. The main idea is to create a somewhat of a hybrid approach, depending on the time and the scope of the project. If the project is more like on a protocol level and it's more complex, of course, we try to create as a rigorous approach as possible. If it's like a simple app or an app that does have some simple functionalities, I think there is no need for actually wasting our time and wasting the client's time by doing all the stuff in the process, in the standard process of token engineering. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think it's all depending on the project. Basically, we cannot say that, okay, this is the best approach, only let's do it from a business side. It all depends on the complexity of the project.
I 100% agree. The complexity of projects are on the whole spectrum of variety of their needs and requirements. So I'm aligned here. There is no need for us to pitch complex approach to simple project. That doesn't make any sense. As you mentioned, it will be just an overkill. There will be no value for both sides in such an approach. Let's try to work on our sales pitch right now. Why should businesses consider taking token engineering approach? What is the value for them? How do you see that?
So if you're talking about Web3 projects, Web3 solutions and stuff like that, there's an inherent economy component in those projects. If you're building a Web3 game, there needs to be a token economy design. Like basically all the Web3 projects are based around the tokens. So if you're designing a project that is based around the tokens, I think the tokens and their functionalities and the incentives and the stuff around that should be taken very seriously. Because tokens can, as we saw in the Luna Terra collapse and the other collapses of a bunch of different projects in Web3. Tokens are a very important component, and the token design is a very important component. So if the project or the business is trying to build a Web3 solution for something, be it decentralized or somewhat centralized or completely centralized, I think token engineering process and the methodology and methods that we use and simulations can actually give them some insights around how to design their product, what are the incentives, how to design the incentives, do they need the governance, properties, or whatever. So I think like the businesses that are venturing into this kind of blockchain solutions, be it loyalty programs with NFTs, tokens, whatever, I think they should seriously consider token engineering process. Because at the end of the day, people are going to use those tokens, and let's make sure that those tokens have their functionalities and as much as possible. I think that's the main sales pitch that I can provide in the simplest of ways that I can convey. So yeah, I don't know what's your take of the importance of the actual token engineering process. I would be interested to hear your opinion.
You've mentioned about the big component of making sure that the project is secure and sustainable. And we can unpack this for two fields. So when businesses are thinking about security, they're mostly thinking about security in terms of like cyber security, like hackers, which is of course a valid approach. But there is also the second component, which is economic security that you mentioned. So for example, in our case, we are working with the partner that is checking implementation of our design in terms of smart contract, not only from this technical point of view, but especially from economics point of view, meaning that there is the whole procedure around answering the question, how I can drain the tokens from the smart contracts, or how I can freeze them, because this will also be project killer, right? If they can't drain it, they will try to freeze them by some kind of the vector attack. It's a part of our value proposition around, hey, let's make sure that the project that is going to probably handle a lot of the value in terms of tokens or money, that it will be secure on these both layers, because then it's all about your investment. It's all about your brand, right? Your reputation. You want to make sure that everything is secure. And so I would say this is the biggest component in terms of why, when I'm answering the question for the clients, why they do need token engineering approach, this will be one of the main theme around sustainability of the project and security of the project, economic security of the project. The second component for me about why business needs this kind of more rigorous approach is how I'm going to answer your questions. If I don't have proper model, like mathematical model, if I don't have proper simulation, how I can answer the question around, should we have inflation model? Should we have like even simplest questions, right? This is the most basic question that probably it's like just the beginning of the whole story. But without the proper data, without the proper assumptions, without the approach of knowing, okay, what is the goal of the system, I would not feel comfortable with answering such questions because you just don't know. Then it's just a guesstimate, right? It's just guessing, okay, let's try with inflation and who knows, maybe we will change it later. So I would say this is the second big component for me, which is being able to answer even the basic questions. This is why you need token engineering. So what do you think about that? So let's maybe go to this second question of how do you approach the process of designing the token, and then we can touch the related topics.
We're trying to build robust and adaptive systems, but the main point of us even doing this token engineering approach is to actually go to the client and fulfill the client's needs. The whole process depends on the client's goals and the actual approach and the actual knowledge level of the client. I guess a lot of the token engineering process itself is actually explaining why it's important and explaining why do we need to take these kind of steps. But the most, if I could bring it in the simplest of terms, my token engineering approach is mostly based around 3 stages: research, designing, and actual validating through models. So in the research phase, we try to have it as iterative as possible, to have as much as contact with client as possible, and to try and see, okay, these are the client's goals. This is what we can do. And this is what's troubling. If a client has some unrealistic goals that this token will be the highest valued token in the market while providing zero utility, then we need to go back to the drawing board and to communicate some stuff with them. So I try to have the research phase with as much as workshops and as much as research as possible to prepare it for the next stage. In the next stage also is an iterative process, but it's more based around actually designing the mathematical model and actually designing the system, because at the end of the day we are designing mini economies in some way, which it depends on the technology, but some of the economies are completely isolated while some of them are interoperable. You can have a bunch of projects using the similar tokens and have some synergy and stuff like that. But mostly so far it's been like the isolated economies. So we try to go with the flow and design the best project that is the best system that is possible with the inputs from the clients and the research. Afterwards, we try and we had some propositions, some scenarios. Let's see how it performs in the various conditions and the various game theoretic scenarios, and let's see how these agents of the system operate and what do they do and stuff like that. And for the viewers, just the agents are not like the matrix agents. They are just the participants in the system that use the actual product. We try to have it as thorough as possible, with as much contact with the client in order to fulfill the client's needs. At the end of the day, we're trying to build Web3 businesses in some way. This is the approach that I personally have, that my team is actually taking on right now. And so far it has shown itself good, it's shown itself well, and we had some great insights. And I used to work in the R&D department. We had a bunch of our internal ideas that we had token engineering process, because everything sounds great on paper, but when you go through the utility and through the benefits that it will bring to the users, maybe some ideas are not that good. So I think token engineering process and the whole token engineering idea is very important for any project, for any Web3 project or blockchain project.
We share a similar approach. I like what I hear. That's something where in most of the cases we are aligned. Also looking of what Token Engineering Academy is doing, it seems that we are building here an industry standard, which is really great to hear and taking part in. You've mentioned two things I noted down. First of all, education. This is also my experience, which is during the whole process when we are working with the client, education component is critical. We are starting from that. Things depends on where is the client in terms of knowledge level. In most of the cases for us, we do start with basic education. There are some cases where it's not needed, but then we are also recommending that in order to establish just common language, the vocabulary between ourselves, to make sure that when we are using the same words, we understand them in a same way. Because sometimes it happens that we may use the same words, but we understand them differently, which can bring to some challenges later on working on the project. So the education part, we are starting with that, and then we are putting a lot of effort during the whole process to always educate. Because again, client is not really familiar with the process, so at each step of the process, we need to make sure that we explain it correctly. And at the end of the day, during the process, we are delivering the value in form of data, and the data, it's not negotiable, meaning it's not my opinion, it's not my feeling. I'm showing you the data, and let's talk on top of the data. Let's make data-driven decisions, which brings totally different dynamics when you are discussing with client versus someone who is just trying to push opinions on some topic without being able to connect them with any data evidence. So I think this is another selling point that we can use when we are talking with client and trying to convince why this process is needed. This brings me to my second point that I noted here. It's because it reminds me, I had a couple of cases where we had a client with already existing tokenomics, and they came to us just for the development part, right? And I can see I don't even have to simulate something, because after you gain some experience, you can see some flaws in some design systems, especially because most of the systems are just copy-paste, which is another issue. And then how I can approach the client with this bad information so they will not be defensive and they will not treat it as me just trying to, I don't know, upsell something, but they will understand that I'm trying to rescue their project from the total failure after some time. And this is when I'm using simulations. So then I go back to this point of, okay, I'm not going to talk about the opinions. And this is basically my pitch. Hello, client. So I can see some problems here. I know you didn't ask me about it. I'm not going to talk opinions here. Here is the data. Here is the simulation. And then this is totally different discussion, especially if you are talking about the data related to financial part of the system, maybe price of the token or reserves of the liquidity. This is totally different discussion then. So I think it's yet another point of why this data approach is so important and how it helps to convey the message of this is the proper approach.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in the education part, it's hard. That's why we focus so much on research and workshops. We need to find a similar language because the client may have some unrealistic expectations on the system and stuff like that. So I think the education part is quite important, especially in this age, because a lot of Web2 companies that we want to call them, we usually call them Web2 companies, like traditional companies, they're venturing Web3. We need to find a similar language while not like being too technical and like to try and educate and to actually show them why this approach is beneficial for them. And the best way, as you said, is actually providing the quantitative data, the hard truths, the mathematics behind it, and not just opinions, because everyone has an opinion about everything. But we need some cold hard facts to actually back it up and to actually have something that is useful to the client. So yeah, I completely agree.
And building on the question of how your approach looks like in terms of designing the system and this theme of simulations, like my approach in terms of simulation, especially for the client that is not really convinced, is let's start from the worst case scenario. This is for me like always the best one because it can't be worse. So at least there is this anchoring of, hey, okay, this is the worst case. So what we can do in order to work on top of that to make it just better, and how we can prepare for this worst case scenario, because of course there is like plenty of solutions for that. And then you can be only positively surprised, assuming that the whole design is good and you work back from worst case scenario, then it only can be better. But this is radical approach, but this is what I like to do.
Yeah, we need to prepare for the worst and to actually design some properties of the system that can be triggered in the case of the worst case scenario, in order to have the actual benefit of the users of the system in mind, and not just the initial investors and people that actually build those projects. There's an ethical component in designing this kind of system, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be a consultant or a designer of a system that scammed a lot of people out their money. So I think that's quite an important aspect of token engineering process, and that's why we need, as I said, some of the more technical knowledge around it. Because we do workshops and we do a bunch of the discovery phases and research, but at the end of the day, some of the stuff needs to be implemented and designed in a way that's the most beneficial. And that's why we need the technical knowledge, and that's why this field is complex. At the end of the day. But yeah, I think your approach is quite good, because like projects initially, of course they think about the worst case scenario, but the worst case scenario should be presented in a way that is tangible and they can see the impact that the worst case scenario can have on their system and on their users. I actually applaud the approach, and I think it's quite important to go from the worst case scenario.
My experience is that projects tends to be overly optimistic. I've never seen, at least this is my personal experience, I've never seen projects that start to talk with me about worst case scenario. It was more like the best case scenario approach. Yeah. So then I'm like more trying really to balance out to make sure that we'll bring the discussion to more pragmatic way of thinking. But I love the point that you make about the ethics, and ethics is also the component that is considered during the whole Token Engineering Academy. And I love the analogy that is in articles from, there are a couple of articles about the token engineering, like the one that started the whole movement. And I like this analogy of engineering in public infrastructure. You can't build the bridges without ethical approach, right? Because if you will build the bridge that people are using every day, and at the end of the day, if because of your incompetency or lack of ethics or whatever motivation that you had, if at the end of the day someone will risk their lives, that's why that ethical component is important. And with token engineering, the approach is similar. The whole idea is to make sure that token engineers looks at themselves as engineers of public infrastructure, where they are responsible for the systems that they are creating, because at the end of the day, there is this financial component. We do know the whole potential of these systems, that it can be integrated with our everyday lives everywhere. But even now, with this, let's say, still early adoption, there is financial component that can directly impact your life. With the things that you mentioned, for example, Luna crash, if you are losing all of your money because of some system that they were claiming that all is fine and it will never collapse, then it can impact people's lives. So that's why this ethical component is really important, and I really like that you bring this up. On top of that, we are talking about this quantitative approach and the whole design process. So at the end of the day, when you will design the system, how you measure the success? What are the success metrics at the end of the day? What's your approach for that?
When initially designing the system, initial measurement of success is actually creating a system that benefits the client, that fulfills the client's need in the best way possible. But at the end of the day, once the project goes live, I think the way we measure success is actually the network effects of the project, the amount of users, the amount of transactions, amount of users, network effects, governance, and utility of the project. Because at the end of the day, we are designing projects that actually do have some utility and bring some value to the users. I think that's the best measurement of success. Once the project goes live, there's a lot of factors that go in, but those factors can also be taken into considerations before actually launching the project, but also after launching the projects, we can also implement some new policies. There's a possibility of implementing new policies that can take care of and mitigate some of the market conditions. I would be interested in hearing your opinion around it. This is my opinion at this stage. The field is quite new, so we're all still exploring the field and trying to come up with the best measurements of success and the best methodologies and methods.
For me, measurement of success starts with initial discussion with the client when we are engaging with the process. And as with the token engineering process, proper list of questions where in most of the cases at specific point in time at the beginning, people behind the projects are not always able to even answer. At the end of the day, the measurement of the success is being able to fulfill the goals of the project. So if the goals are able to be measurable and they are quantitative, then we can measure them and then we can say, okay, there is a success. So I think one of the most straightforward example would be if we are designing the system where there is financial component, the token is on decentralized exchange, and the token is even used for governance purposes, where we know that the price of this token is important in terms of how this can affect the whole governance structure. If the same token is used for the governance, like if the goal is to protect some specific price point for 1 year of a time, then one of the ways how you can do that is you can prepare proper financial reserve to make sure if there will be hard times, let's call it like that, you will be able to back it up with this reserve specifically for this purpose. And on top of the simulations, on top of the worst case scenario on top of the different strategies that agents can take in the ecosystem, then we are able to answer specifically the question of how much of reserve do I need in order to protect specific price point. This is, I think, the most straightforward example and the simplest one, because there can be many different approaches and more complex. But I think this financial component is always something that it's with people, and people outside of our field are able to understand. Summing up, first of all, in terms of defining success metrics of the project, we need to make sure we will define the goals of the projects that are measurable, which is also a challenge. It's not so easy. Like, people tend to think that it's easy, but not really. It takes time, because at the end of the day, as you mentioned, we are handling many of the cases where there are over-optimistic assumptions or some not even possible assumptions to materialize in some projects. In all of the systems, we need to have some compromise, right? You can't achieve everything. You need to have some optimization, you need to have some compromise. So this is also the job that you need to take, invest your time in educating client and in providing data-driven proofs. And you've mentioned about important point for me, I think one of my favorite topic, which is governance. If I go back in time, I think the governance topic, this is what brings me into Web3 specifically. I was not really interested in all of this craziness that was happening on the market with prices of the cryptocurrencies and so on. But when I realized that creating crypto economic systems can solve many of the challenges related to the governance, then I was totally into the rabbit hole of crypto, blockchain, Web3 stuff, and so on. And when I'm saying governance, I think there is a lot to unpack there as well, because when people talk about the governance, they may refer to the whole political systems, which is also the case. But I think for now, it's the most challenging to even grasp and especially execute on and implement somewhere. Then we can also talk about the level of governance in organizations itself, like companies, and then on local communities. And there are so many great approaches, theories around how to do governance on top of the tokenomic systems that I think we will need to do like another 100 hours of recording to even touch that. So probably this is not the case for today, but just really briefly from your side, like how do token engineering intersects with governance and community building? Is it also important from this angle? What's your take on that?
So I just wanted to have a quick comment on your story, what got you into Web3. The thing that got me into Web3 is actually, besides governance, it was actually the possibility of the Web3 projects to self-actualize and self-capitalize. Because if you look at Ethereum, it's not a business, it's like a project that has a token that raises in value as a consequence of its use. That's one of the reasons that got me into it. But in terms of governance, I think like token engineers can benefit because, as you said, there's politics in the system. But I think governance can also be viewed as rules of the systems, rules of the politics, what can be implemented, what cannot be implemented. I think token engineers play an important role in that, because if you're initially designing a project, there's quite a big possibility of attacks on the governance and steering the system. Token engineers need to be there to have some knowledge around governance, around rules, around possible attacks, and we need to try and mitigate those by implementing correct governance rules. I think it's quite a big component in building those decentralized systems. They still need some rules in order to function, and actually the system needs to have its objective goal. The objective goal can only be achieved if the governance rules and the governance structures are created in a way that's the most beneficial. And if the users of the system do not align with those governance rules, they can just opt out of the governance and opt out of decision making.
So in terms of governance, for me, at least at my point of knowledge, I'm trying really to keep up with all of the inventions there. So on one hand, when I started with the governance topic, it was even before my involvement in Web3, it was I thought experiments around how governance works in the previous company that I worked in. And it was a big company, so there were many people involved. It was like traditional top-down organization trying to be more, let's call it decentralized, but still under centralized structure. So in a way that there were like kind of autonomous software development teams and interdisciplinary teams, people with different functions trying to work on a chunk of the product that will allow them to be as autonomous as possible, because then it will bring effectiveness, impact, and so on. And I've seen so many challenges with such approach, so many crossroads and pushbacks on different layers of the organization in different discussions, so many problems with not aligned goals of, again, different layers of organization or different even departments of the organization, that basically at many times it looked like everyone, instead of being autonomous, everyone was more like dependent on each other. It got me thinking how we can solve that. And I was in a managerial role. That was also part of my job to solve this problem. And then I also ran in the rabbit hole of the governance topic in organizations, more into organization context than in the political context. And at first point, there was this whole idea and premise of crypto, blockchain, and related fields around, hey, we can solve the governance problems with decentralized autonomous organizations. But at the end of the day, where we are right now, it's okay, cool, but it also brings totally new challenges to the table that we need to solve. So there are plenty of approaches that seems to be highly interesting, but I do believe that we need to still invest a lot of time and energy to prove that they do work. And the reality is, as much as I'm a big fan of DAOs, the reality is that they are also facing the same challenges as centralized organizations. Plus, they bring their own challenges to the table that are sometimes even more complex than the centralized setup. For me, it's an exercise that we still need to solve. So the last question about the future. How do you see the field of token engineering evolving in the future?
I think the biggest factor that's going to influence the whole process and the methods and methodology is actually going to be the regulation. If you follow all the news around the regulation, like regulating cryptocurrencies and stuff, I think we need to take that into consideration. Web3 is a great field for experimenting with tokens and the utility and various other use cases. But I think like the regulation is going to have a big impact on how we design those tokens, what the limitations are. Maybe it's going to be used in some other jurisdictions that take care of the tokens in a different way. The whole innovation R&D part of Web3 is going to have a significant impact on token engineering process, because as we see more interoperability between projects and different chains, I think that will need to also be taken into consideration. I think our insights from our practical work and the research that we do is going to have a significant impact. And I think that's why the initiatives like Token Engineering Academy, all the content that we provide is going to be important in the following years. I'm actually interested to hear about your opinion around this topic.
I think you've touched important topic, which is regulations. And this is exactly why when we are doing initial workshops with our clients, we are doing that with law firm. We are involving lawyers at pretty much the beginning of the process. And it's because the field is so new that we need to make sure that we understand where we are right now and what are the possible regulations that may impact the project. And during the design phase, we need to make sure that if we have some idea that we would like to introduce some solution, some design pattern, how it will affect the legal component of the project. I always like to say that there are three most important components in Web3 project which are interconnected, which is technology, economics, and law. And if you will change some of them, you need to also take a look how it impact rest of them. So if you would change something in economics, you need to make sure that everything is still balanced and knowledgeable about your change in the rest of the fields. That's why we are involving all of these three fields into the discussion about the design of the projects from the very beginning, not only to look at the current state, but also thinking about right now the regulations that are upcoming in European Union. When we are designing, we know that this will happen. We know how it's going to look like. So yeah, let's anticipate the future. I do think, as you mentioned, that there will be more and more regulation, and I'm not considering it always as a bad idea. Regulations can help. They can also destroy the field itself. So I don't know. Let's see if they are going to help, if they are going to bring more clarity, if they are going to streamline the creation of the projects and innovation, then why not? Then that's great, because we will not need to invest so much time, so much energy, so much money in order to figure out, is everything what we are doing legal, because most of the times regulators doesn't provide clarity on top of the questions that we are having. So that's the one point, and there will be more of that. Hopefully it will bring more clarity, and we are going to incorporate this in our design process from the very beginning, and we will be able to use just a framework of thinking, okay, if I will introduce this component, now I know it's clear for me that this will result in such an impact from the legal perspective. When I think about the future of token engineering, I do believe that we will reach a point where we will have standards, frameworks in place, similarly to regulations, meaning that right now it looks a little bit like each one of us is trying to invent everything from scratch over and over again. And this is nice, but at some point, I would love to see proven framework of some solutions, at least some foundations, where we can, again, optimize the process, streamline it, make sure that, okay, if this is case A, then I can use just this pattern. If this is case B, I can use this pattern, because at the end of the day, there will be a lot of value if each one of us in the industry will try to invent the wheel over and over again. Building on top of some frameworks and standards that we will develop, we will be able to focus on some more complex topics and put our energy there. So this is the future that I foresee, and especially thanks to the initiatives like Token Engineering Academy, I do believe that this will be also the platform that will connect people interested in this idea, as both of us, right? Right now we are connected, we are discussing about interesting stuff, thanks to the fact that we connected through the Token Engineering Academy. So for me, this is the first step. This is, at least we have some platform right now. So let's take advantage of that. And the third component will be about the awareness. So I do believe there will be a lot of awareness that the token engineering approach will be benchmark in the industry, and that all of the serious companies that would like to go into Web3 space, they will demand from the consultants, from the companies related to the field, that they are using this kind of approach. Similarly, if you think about software engineering field that I'm coming from, it's a standard that company needs to use, in most of the cases, agile approach, not a waterfall approach, right? So this is how I foresee that. Any last thought?
I just want to thank you for having me in this podcast, and I think communication between token engineers and people in the space and the actual developers is quite important, and I think we are fighting the good battle here in order to protect the users of these protocols and these services, and to actually create something valuable for the world and not just the Web3 community.
Great, Alex. It's really great to hear, and thank you for accepting my invitation. It was, for me, such a great discussion. As I mentioned, I would love to discuss further. There are so many topics that we can unpack, and I can reinforce what you said, which is I do believe we as token engineers, and in general the industry itself, we should build on each other and really create a platform and build this awareness on the market. And this will be, at the end of the day, win-win situation for all of us. So that's why at least this is something that both of us contributed to this idea of building together, which is really great, and I appreciate that. So I do hope that we will have another occasion to talk maybe about some more specific and detailed topic. When it comes for today, that concludes our episode. So thank you again. And for our listeners, we hope you found it informative and insightful. If you are interested in learning more about token engineering and staying up to date with the latest developments in the field, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. And if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Leave us a comment and let us know what you thought of the episode and what you would like to hear more about in the future. Thanks for listening, and we will be back with another episode soon. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.